Let's continue exploring the universe within art and the art within farms. I'm your host, OmLedu, and in this episode, we're going to go over how to build a super easy iron farm. Iron farms are actually extremely simple to build. The only hard part is, getting the villagers and breeding them. And to be honest, using a village breeder or trying to trap all the villagers into a tiny area is just a lot more work and doesn't actually provide you with any benefits whatsoever. So in this video, we're going to go over all of the mechanics behind iron farms, then we're going to quickly build the farm, then we're going to talk about village traders, because every iron farm should have a village trader attached to it, since you need villagers to spawn golems anyway. So whether you want them organized or you want them free roaming, it is all totally up to you and how much effort you want to put into the village trader. But the iron farm itself is super duper quick and easy. But the first thing that we need to talk about is some of the mechanics behind iron farms. First of all, you cannot have any beds, bells, or workstations within 64 blocks of where you want to build the farm. You can have them after you build the farm and you get all the villagers sorted, but while you're breeding the villagers or while you're organizing the villagers, if they start connecting to random workstations or random beds or bells, it's going to cause you a headache. And this applies to every single type of iron farm because it's one of the core mechanics of villagers. Now, golems will spawn up to 6 blocks above or below, or 8 blocks horizontally from the leader's bed. The leader's bed is the very first bed that is taken whenever you place down beds near villagers. Golems are also only able to spawn on the highest available block in this radius. So you could build 2 spawning platforms to increase your rates, because the bigger your platforms are, the better your rates will be, but this is no longer the case, because they only spawn on the highest available block. And you also need at least 20 villagers for golems to spawn. Now, villagers used to be able to open iron doors, but this doesn't seem to be the case anymore. So you can use iron doors to trap in your villagers if you want an easy way in and out, but villagers definitely have never been able to open trapdoors, so it's kind of a safer alternative for a door, but for some reason they can't open iron doors anymore, so you can always just use iron doors, unless Mojang changes their mind again. Now, as for the spawning platform, it is going to be 19 by 19, and I would recommend building the floor out of leaves with some kind of light source underneath the leaves. This will provide light, so that you can see and so it doesn't spawn mobs, but also the leaves will block raid spawns in case you accidentally trigger a raid. And then the black and white stripes is just where our walls are going to be. So all of your villagers are going to be hanging out where the leaves are, and then your walls are going to be where the black and white is. Now originally I was going to build this right here, but I have all these lecterns and workstations around, so that's not going to work. I don't want to break all the lecterns, so I decided to build this little area out here, also so I can give you a visual example of how far away you need to clear workstations and beds. You need to clear them all the way out to that orange line from where you're going to be building this, like 64 blocks away from the walls of the farm. I mean, it is a massive area that you need to check for beds and workstations. And luckily, you'll be able to tell if a villager is connected to a workstation that isn't actually in the farm, or is trying to leave the farm to find his bed because he connected to a different bed. Another thing to keep in mind when picking a build location, especially if you're building this underground or next to other buildings, you want to give yourself a little bit of clearance around the outside of the farm. Around 5 to 7 blocks, just in case your villagers decide to switch beds. Basically, you just don't want any caves or platforms that golems could spawn on within this radius. So either fill it in completely or dig it out completely. Now, with this farm being 19 by 19, it should never leak golems, because the village leader bed should always be in the middle. But villagers like to switch beds sometimes, so if the village leader happened to switch a bed that's on the outside, it might leak golems that are on that side, because golems can spawn up to 8 blocks away from the bed. But finally, on to the build tutorial, starting with the materials list. So you will need at least 76 leaves, but this does not include the leaves for the floor. If you want to make the floor out of leaves to prevent raid spawns, you will need leaves for that as well. Then you will need a bunch of building blocks, 11 signs, 1 campfire, at least 2 chests and at least 3 hoppers for the storage system, at least 20 beds and 20 workstations, depending on how many villagers you want, but you have to have at least 20. Then you need a couple of water buckets, a lava bucket, and if you're building this above ground, you might want a lightning rod, which we will talk about at the end of the video. But now it's time to start building this, so mark out your 19 by 19 area, and again I recommend building the floor out of leaves just to prevent spawns. But you don't have to. But if you don't use leaves, just be extra sure not to trigger a raid or it might kill some of your villagers. But then our walls are going to be 6 blocks tall, so our floor is 17 by 17, and our walls are going to be on the outside of the 19 by 19. But we're going to go up by 6 blocks on all 4 sides. And keep in mind where you want your entrance. This also needs to be something that villagers cannot interact with, so an iron door seems to work, but you can also use trapdoors or a piston door. And I'll be going over how to expand this building and how to expand the doorway if you want it to be a little more extra safe so that villagers cannot escape. But for now, we're going to go up by 6 blocks on all 4 sides, like so. So now we have a 19 by 19 square that is 6 blocks tall, and we're going to build the roof right here on the topmost block. And then after we've gotten that done, we're going to go up by 1 more block around the edges. So our edges are going to be 7 blocks tall, and then once we got that done, we're going to place 1 block in all 4 corners, like so. And this is going to be our spawning platform. But next up, we need to place leaves on the top of all of the edges and on top of the corners. But also, I would recommend to leave a hole somewhere so that it's easy for you to get out, and then just place that leaf block in that hole whenever you're done. But now it's time to place the water for our spawning platform. So you don't want to place water next to the corners, but you want to place water on all of the sides everywhere other than next to the corners. If you place it next to the corners, it'll fill in the entire platform with water source blocks, and that's not very fun, so be sure not to place water in the corners. But of course you can place water every other block, and it will automatically turn the blocks next to it into water sources as you go along. And remember, when doing this in survival, you can just pick up water that has source blocks next to it, and it will reconvert itself back into a source block after you've picked it up. But when you're done, every block should be covered with water except for the centermost tile. Then we're going to pop out that block, and we're going to jump down into our farm and build a collection system. Now I will talk a little bit about expanding the collection system later on, but for now, just place down a double chest or 2, and then place hoppers going into those directly underneath that hole in the ceiling. Then around that hole, we need to place 4 solid blocks, like so, and then we need to place a 3rd hopper going down into the 2 that are going into the chest. You will need to crouch and then jump in order to place this hopper, but the main reason we need a 3rd hopper there is just so that we can reach it from the spawning platform. So now we're going to head back up to our spawning platform, and then we're going to place a ring of temporary blocks just around the hole so that the water doesn't push us into the hole. The reason I had you place the water first is so that you made sure that the spawning platform is the correct size. But now we're going to place 1 more hopper going down into that hopper, so you should have a 2-block hole above that hopper. Now we are going to place a campfire inside of this hole, but before we do that, let's go ahead and place the signs so that we can place the lava that will kill the golems. So we're going to place a sign inside of that hole, then we're going to place 2 signs on top of that one. You will need to crouch in order to place signs on top of each other or next to each other. But then next to that topmost one, we're going to place 4 signs going off in each direction. Now it's also a little difficult to place signs on top of each other because the hitboxes are so small. So if you're having trouble, place some temporary blocks so that you can aim more above them than kind of at the side of them. But then we need to place 1 more sign on top of all of the 4 that we just placed, except for the middle one. So at the very top, you should have 4 signs surrounding an air block, and then under that, you should have 5 signs, 4 of which are surrounding the middle one. And now we can place a lava bucket on top of that sign, and it will be trapped by the 4 floating signs, like so. And so this is how the golems are going to get killed. But now we need to place a campfire in this hole on top of that hopper so that it kills the cats. And that's literally it. Now all you have to do is break out these temporary blocks that are holding back the water. Just be sure not to fall in the hole because you don't want to get burned by your campfire. But that's all there is to the iron farm. Except for getting the villagers in here, of course. But that's why, every iron farm should have a village trader, and every village trader should have an iron farm. Building one without the other is just wasted effort, because the hardest part, again, is just getting the villagers to the farm. But really, once you get 2 villagers in here, you can just breed them in here, and even that part is super easy. But anyway, now let's place the beds. So we're going to need a ceiling or a temporary ceiling, 2 blocks above the floor, like so. Now if you use solid blocks, if you don't want to break them out and have floating beds, you won't be able to open this topmost chest. But you can switch out the solid blocks with slabs, or once you place the beds, you can break out the solid blocks and the beds will just kind of float there, and that will allow you to open the chest. And this part is really up to you. Now you can technically place the beds higher, But the villagers don't like to connect to beds that are way above them. Like you'll have to build a temporary platform, wait for the villagers to jump onto the platform, and then wait for them to connect to the beds. But once they're connected to the beds, you can break out the platform and they will stay connected to the beds. But if you just make the beds 2 blocks above their heads, like we're doing right here, then the villagers will just automatically connect to the beds as soon as they enter this room. So it makes it a lot easier than trying to convince them to connect to the beds. Now, whether you use solid blocks or slabs for your platform, or if you break out your platform after you've placed the beds, that is all totally up to you. It won't affect anything except for the visual appearance and your ability to open the chests. Personally, I kind of like how the slab platform looks, but either way, your platform needs to be at least 7 by 7 in order to fit 20 beds. Now, if you want more beds, you'll just make the platform bigger, but we'll talk about that later. So for now, we're going to place 4 beds with the pillow touching the hopper in the middle. We want one of these 4 beds to be our village leader's bed so that the golem spawning is as centralized as we can possibly get it. But for all the other beds, it doesn't matter where you put them, just stick them on this platform somewhere. And you need to decide how many villagers you want to be in this trader. If you just want the basic 20 villagers to spawn golems, then you just need 20 beds. But if you want 30 villagers, to have a bigger trader, just add in more beds until you have 30 beds. And we're actually going to have to break and replace all the beds once we get the villagers in here. But, if you want the bed platform to not be visible, then you can just make an entire ceiling at this level. That would be fine. Or if you want the beds just to be floating, to have this weird textured wooden ceiling, that's fine too, but wait until the end to break out the blocks. Because again, we're going to have to break and replace all the beds one more time before the farm is totally finished. But really quick, before we move on to the villagers, let's talk a little bit more about the storage system. So you could always add a third double chest onto the floor as it is if you have a floating bed directly above the chests, because the beds won't block the chest from opening. Or you could always dig into the floor and add a complex storage system of any kind, with like a shulker loader or an item sorter. You could always just add a bigger storage underneath the floor. But if you want a bigger storage system without digging into the floor, you could always do something like this, where the hopper is going down into a chest, which then splits the output using hoppers into more chests. So if we have 4 double chests with hoppers going into them, underneath that chest right there, now we have 4 double chests with another double chest as rollover. So really, your storage system is totally up to you, whether you want to dig into the floor to make it bigger, or whether you just want a single chest. It is all totally up to you. Just like with the bed platform, neither of these things will affect the village trader or the golem farm. But now all that's left is to get the villagers in here, and then we're done. That is super duper exciting. So to get villagers in here, you're probably going to have to transport them from somewhere. Luckily, a boat can hold 2 villagers, and 2 villagers is all you need in order to breed an infinite number of them. Now, since Mojang hates us and they've completely changed villager trading for the next update, you are probably maybe going to want to transport villagers from around the world into your village trader. That's super duper unfortunate. I'm very upset that Mojang hates us that much. But either way, whether you want to transport villagers from all across the world and get them in here, or if you just want to bring 2 of them in a boat and then breed them, that is all totally up to you. Really, it mainly depends on what sort of trades you want from your trader. But just throw some food at them and wait for them to make babies. Now, while we wait for them to make babies and while we wait for the babies to grow up, we can start placing down our workstations. So you can either just throw workstations all over the building randomly and call it good, or you can be nice and organized and place them along the wall. If you place the workstations every other block along the wall, that will make it really easy to load the villagers into their own cells so that they can't wander around, which I will talk about here in a minute. But first, if you built the floor out of leaves, you will also need either leaves or solid blocks above the workstations and above the beds in order to prevent raid mobs from being able to spawn in here. So I usually seal off the beds into its own room, and I cover up all the workstations with blocks and make the floor out of leaves, just to keep raid mobs completely out of the farm. And so if you want to lock the villagers into their own cells in order to make them easier to trade with, you should end up with something like this. But before we start assigning workstations, and before we can break and replace the beds, we need to wait for the babies to grow up, if you're breeding them in-house. Baby villagers are really naughty, and they will steal workstations and steal beds from adult villagers as the babies grow. So before we can finish off the farm, we need to wait for all of the babies to grow up so that we only have adult villagers. This is also why it's important to have the exact number of beds as villagers that you want to have in your trader, so that they don't just keep breeding, forcing you to wait on babies to grow up. But once you have all of your villagers in the farm ready to go, no more babies and no more villagers that need to be transported, it's now time to break and replace all of the beds. So we're going to just break all of the beds, and then we're going to start by placing the 4 center ones with the pillows around the hopper. But before we start placing beds, we need to make double sure that there are no beds in this area. Make sure that there are no beds that the villagers have linked to. I would also recommend building some sort of temporary pen around the door just in case one of them escapes like this one just did. Even if it's just blocks or a fence around the doorway, that's fine. Or if you want to expand the doorway to make it safer, like I mentioned before, there is an easy way to do that I will be going over near the end of the video. But again, once you finish transporting or breeding all of your villagers and there are no more babies, it is now time to place the beds. So start off by placing the 4 beds around the hopper with the pillow touching the hopper. And you should see the green confirmation sparkles that villagers do when they link to something. Now those solid blocks may be blocking some of those particles, but you should still be able to see them either through those blocks or above the villagers themselves. And then once you've placed those 4 beds and made sure that there were sparkles, now just place all of the rest of the beds around the platform, also making sure that each bed, has some sparkles. And then replace your collection system if you had to temporarily change it. And the basics of the farm are now officially complete. I still will be going over how to expand the room if you want even more villagers, as well as how to expand the doorway if you want that to be safer, and how to easily lock the villagers into their own cells to make them easier to trade with so that they can't wander around. But, the farm should start spawning cats and golems as soon as you reach this point. Now there might be a delay before it starts spawning golems because 75% of the villagers have to have worked on the previous day in order to spawn golems. So just wait for all of the villagers to have worked, and then wait for a new day to start spawning the golems. Now if you want to expand this building in order to house more villagers, it's as easy as poking a hole in the wall and expanding it. The only thing to keep in mind is that you want to have leaves on the roof of the building, just to prevent golems from spawning in case the beds get messed up. Even if the beds get messed up, it will still spawn golems on the platform, but it just might leak golems onto the roof if there is no leaves there. But again, because this farm is 19 by 19, not only does that give you the best rates that you can get, but it also will usually prevent golems from leaking. So you could just expand the building without having leaves, but again, if the beds get messed up, then it will spawn golems if there are no leaves. So again, if you want a different doorway or if you want a bigger room, just put leaves on top of the ceiling just to be safe. Now, when it comes to organizing your villagers, again, you can just let them be chaotic and just let them all wander around, or you can trap them all into their own individual cells. And if you lined the workstations along the wall like I showed you, all you have to do is wait for them to work, and then just trap them in. They will automatically go into their cells all on their own whenever it's time for them to work. So all you have to do, again, is just wait for them to work, then just start placing down some blocks. Also be aware, if you're trying to prevent raid mobs from spawning, that you'll need the blocks to go all the way to the ceiling, and you will also need like a trap door or something in here so that they can't spawn on that one block. It's also nice to be able to close it to completely protect the villagers, just in case, some weird stuff happens. But that's it. All you have to do, again, if they're in the wrong place, you can just place a water bucket to push them out of the hole if you don't want to wait on them to move on their own, and then just push them into the correct cell. It's really as easy as that. You can kind of push villagers around, and they'll automatically go to the workstation that they're trying to work at. Now you do want to make extra sure that they are trapped next to their own workstation. You don't want to have to reassign workstations because you trapped them in the wrong place. And you always want them to work since 75% of them have to work in order to spawn golems. So just be sure to trap them in the cell that they are working at. But you can get creative with the cells. You can make some in the ceiling, where you're trading with some legs, or if you want to expand it even further, rather than trying to get the villagers into the ceiling, I would recommend just placing the villagers kind of in between the pre-existing cells. So like we can just place a workstation either on one of these blocks or in the front here, and then we can get a villager on the inside of here, not a baby, but an adult, and we'll have another villager to trade with, and it only takes up a little bit more space. So really, where you place your cells and how creative you get with it is all totally up to you. But remember that if you want to add villagers, not only do you need to add more beds, but you also need to break and replace all the beds once the babies have grown up. But always start with the 4 beds around the hopper, because you want one of those beds to be claimed first. But before we end this video, let's talk about problem solving and problem prevention. So iron farms really don't break as often as people think they do, at least in my experience. They rarely ever break. But if you notice that it's not spawning golems, it could be because it rained the previous day. Whenever it rains, not all villagers will work, and since 75% of villagers have to work on the previous day in order to spawn golems, sometimes the reason it's not spawning golems is just because it rained on the day before. Now, if it's been several days and it's not spawning cats or golems, it means that either the beds are messed up or that you've tamed some cats in the area. So break and replace all the beds, starting with the ones around the hopper to make sure that they're not spawning outside of the farm, and then check the entire area for cats and golems. You do not want to tame cats near this farm. If you tame too many cats near this farm, it will turn off golem spawning altogether. Now, if the farm is spawning cats, but it's not spawning golems, that means it's the workstations. That means that some of the villagers are not working at their assigned workstation. But before you start breaking the workstations, try to figure out which villagers aren't working. Because in my experience, even if you've traded with a villager, if you break his workstation, sometimes he just changes occupations for no reason at all. So like, I'm going to trade with this farmer and see if it's still a thing, but it seemed like an intended feature because it happened to me so many times that even if I traded with a villager, he still changed his occupation. So let's see. Oh, he didn't actually change his occupation. So either they fixed the bug or the bug is more rare. But either way, I would be careful when breaking workstations because it's happened to me over and over and over that villagers change their occupation. But, there is an easy way to see who is working and who is not. Simply max out one of their trades so that it has an X over it, and do this for everyone. This may be kind of a pain, especially if you haven't cured the villagers, but then if you wait for a day and see who still has an X, because when they work, the X should go away. So the ones that aren't working will still have the X. And then rather than breaking out that workstation, just let the villager out of his cell, and he will wander to the workstation that he is trying to work at. And then you can see who else is messed up, from where he goes. And then just retrap him in the correct cell. And one last thing I need to mention is that lightning will turn villagers into witches. If it strikes within, I think it's 4 blocks of the villager, it's like 4 or 7 blocks from the villager, it will turn him into a witch. So you want to have lightning rods in the area to prevent lightning strikes if you built this above ground. So you can either float the lightning rods way up in the air or just have them kind of near the farm. But lightning will also catch leaves on fire, so you want to keep the lightning rods away from the walls and away from the leaves. Now, if you don't have lightning rods or you don't want to use lightning rods, you can always extend the walls out like 4 blocks with a ceiling on top so that the lightning will hit, farther away from the villager. But I've had so many villagers turned into witches that now I always either make a buffer wall with a ceiling or build a glass ceiling way up at build limit to prevent rain and lightning, or just spam lightning rods. But that's all we got for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, favorite, share, and subscribe, and leave a comment. Even if it's just to tell me hi, I would love to hear from you. And if you have any critiques, advice, questions, or requests, simply let me know down in the comments, and I will do my best to help you out. I also plan on making a couple of more videos about iron farms. One about how to convert pre-existing village traders into iron farms, because that's actually super duper easy. And then one on how to fix iron farms if they break, or how to fix just bad designs. I've had so many friends come to me recently because they followed some clickbait iron farm tutorial that had you build a 5x5 hole in the ground, and not only does it not work because it has abysmal rates because the spawning platform is too small, but then also it just bleeds golems all over the place or cats all over the place, which then just breaks the farm every 5 minutes. I've gotten so frustrated seeing all of these nonsense clickbait iron farms out there that not only did I want to make this video to help spread good information about iron farms, but I also want to make another one on how to fix those abysmal designs. But until next time, I've been your host, OmLedu, hopefully teaching you a farming trick or two, and reminding you, as always, don't forget to have fun. Bye-bye!